It's Professor Sanwaknin Day again, and he is a pioneer of narcissistic abuse and the author of Malignant Self-Love. And I hope this will be translated in Turkish soon. And today we will talk about narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder, because in society they are confusing these illnesses. First, can we talk about the narcissistic personality disorder and the differences between borderline?
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Good
morning, Shoshanim. And a warning, this is going to be a long answer because there's a lot to say. You're completely right that there is a huge confusion between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And why is this important? Because many victims of narcissistic abuse actually have borderline personality disorder. And many abusers actually have borderline personality disorder, not narcissistic personality disorder. And if you get it wrong as a clinician or as a member of the public or as a victim even, then the whole attitude is wrong and the outcomes are wrong. A proper diagnosis is the precondition for healing, of course, but also for management. To manage a relationship, to manage a therapeutic process, to manage an interpersonal interaction, to manage the workplace, you need to diagnose people correctly. The differences between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder are not small. They're pretty substantial. So first of all, borderline personality disorder was first described by Adolf Stern in 1938, a long time ago.
Oh.
He didn't call it borderline personality disorder, he called it the borderline group. So this was Adolf Stern in 1938. Then between the 1930s and the 1980s, there were many studies about borderline personality disorder. It was the heyday of these studies, and so we had people like Otto Kernberg and others, and we had, of course, Kohut on the side of narcissism. And at that point in time, many prominent scholars believed that there is a deep relationship between borderline personality organization, borderline features, borderline traits, borderline behaviors, borderline dynamics, and narcissism. They believe that there is a profound etiological connection. In other words, there's something that leads to both conditions emerging simultaneously. Kernberg suggested that borderline is a defense, narcissism is a defense against borderline. He said initially the person develops borderline and then it's terrifying, and so the person defends against the borderline condition by becoming a narcissist.
Then every narcissist can be also borderline, we can
No.
say like this?
Not every narcissist can be borderline, because once you acquire the narcissistic defenses, they take over and they eliminate the borderline.
Okay.
There are, of course, people who are both borderline and narcissists. Of course, there is what we call a comorbidity, borderline and narcissism. It is not 40%, like self-styled experts are saying. There's a lot of nonsense online. One should be very careful. But yeah, there is a comorbidity of this kind. Grotstein, who was another psychoanalyst, suggested that a child who is exposed to abuse and trauma becomes more and more borderline. And then at some point, the child says, I cannot tolerate this borderline condition. I want to become a narcissist. And the child attempts to become a narcissist. If this transition from borderline to narcissism fails, the child remains stuck in the borderline phase and will develop borderline personality disorder. If it succeeds, the child will eliminate the borderline, defend against it very efficiently, bury it in the unconscious, and will become a full-fledged narcissistic person. And that's why Grotstein says that the borderline is a failed narcissist, someone who tried to become a narcissist and failed. So this is generally the general overview of the connection between them. But when we look at the clinical picture, when someone comes to a clinic to get some therapy, or when someone needs to be diagnosed, for example, in court settings or in prison, or when someone needs to be has undergone some kind of massive crisis and needs to be diagnosed. What we do, we look at what we call clinical features. We look at behaviors, we look at dynamics, we look at emotions, we look at cognitions, and so on and so forth. And now I will go into the differences between the two conditions. We start with the elements of borderline which exist in all types of borderline. There is no borderline personality disordered patient alive without these features. There are other features which appear in some borderlines and don't appear in other borderlines. But the ones I'm going to describe right now appear in all borderlines. So the first thing is emotional volatility, emotional dysregulation. This is called affective instability. That is when emotions, negative and positive, overwhelm the borderline, disable the borderline. The borderline becomes paralyzed. It's as if the borderline perceives emotions as threatening, and then the borderline freezes. She freezes. And it's a kind of defense against this situation. So all borderlines have this. All borderlines cope very badly with emotions. Emotions disable, paralyze them. The second element, which is common to all borderlines, is mood lability, ups and downs, cycling, and so on. Now, this is not to be confused with bipolar disorder. In bipolar disorder, we also have cycling between depression and mania, or elation, or euphoria. So we have this. But there are massive, big differences between bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. They are not the same condition, as many Europeans, so-called scholars and so-called clinicians, they make this mistake very often. I was in Austria recently, and I'm sorry to say, but the so-called professionals there confuse BPD and bipolar. So this is very serious confusion. Bipolar disorder is a mood disorder. And the difference between bipolar disorder and BPD is that the cycles of depression and mania are much longer in bipolar. They can last months, sometimes years. Whereas in borderline personality disorder, the cycles are much faster, and typically they are between 4 hours and 4 days, but never longer. Second difference, the sleep patterns in bipolar disorder are dramatically different to the sleep patterns in borderline. In borderline, the borderline patient finds it very difficult to fall asleep, finds difficult to maintain sleep, has insomnia and so on. Whereas the bipolar patient simply does not want to sleep. Is against sleeping, doesn't want to sleep.
They resist sleeping. They resist sleeping.
When they're in the manic phase. In the manic phase, the bipolar resists sleeping, does not want to sleep. And in the depressive phase of bipolar disorder, the patient is hypersomniac. In other words, this kind of patient sleeps 20 hours a day. That is in bipolar, not in borderline. In borderline, there's a constant state of sleep dysfunction, constant state of insomnia, or the sleep is always disturbed in the same way. So mood lability. Next thing is the intensity of the interpersonal relationships. Here is a major source of confusion. Both the borderline and the narcissist idealize, overvalue, and then devalue. Both of them.
The same cycle.
Same cycle, identical. The interpersonal pattern of relationship in borderline is indistinguishable, totally identical to the pattern of relationship in narcissism. They cannot be told apart. However, what is different is the intensity. Whereas in narcissism, the shared fantasy that dictates the cycle of the relationship is very robotic. very automatic. It's as if the narcissist is going through the motions, is not really in it, is not really involved in it. It's like acting. It's like going through, okay, phase 2, okay, phase 3. What can I do? You know, I have to go through it. It's as if the narcissist is one step removed from the relationship. He's like observing maybe the relationship. So you could see in narcissism a pattern of detachment, whereas in borderline, the relationship is super intense. The intensity is enormous. It's fire, it's brimstone, it's uncontrollable, it's dramatic, super dramatic. So this is common to borderline, actually, not to narcissists. And the intensity is a differentiating feature between narcissism and borderline. But in this relational disorder, this is called relational disorder. In this relational disorder, the borderline also starts by love bombing, devaluing, idealizing, and then devaluing the partner. In this sense, it's the same. The splitting defense in borderline is the same as a splitting defense in narcissism. So that's what allows the borderline to idealize. You're all good, you can do no wrong, you're perfect, you're amazing, you're unprecedented, I've never had anyone like you, and so on. And then immediately transition to, I hate you, you're horrible, everything you do is wrong.
And they're all real emotions
yes,
at that time.
All this is perceived as authentic or ego, not ego alien, ego congruent. So the borderline perceives all this as real, coming from the inside, and so on and so forth. But in her case, in the case of the borderline, it's much more, as I said, dramatic and intense than in the case of the narcissist. And this is why it's very difficult for victims of narcissistic abuse, because the narcissist treats you, when you're the intimate partner, treats you as kind of object. You're objectified, kind of. He will love bomb you and idealize you, but you always have a feeling that it's not really about you. The idealization in the case of narcissism is about the narcissist and about the process. The narcissist is like invested in the process, not in you. It could be anyone. There's a feeling that it could have been anyone. It didn't have to be me as the intimate partner, but it could have been anyone.
Yes.
And very often, victims of narcissistic abuse discover that the narcissist repeats the same pattern with the same behaviors, with the same sentences, with the same words, with multiple potentials, sometimes at the same time.
At the same time.
Because there's no attachment, there's no what we call cathexis, there's no emotional investment. Whereas in borderline, the emotional investment, the cathexis is very clear, very powerful, overwhelming, consuming. The drama is operatic, like opera. It's a production, a major production, and so on and so forth. In borderline, we have something that we don't have in narcissism, and that is what we call the twin anxieties. We have a combination of abandonment anxiety. By the way, abandonment anxiety or separation anxiety is not the clinical term. The clinical term is separation insecurity. So we have abandonment anxiety on the one hand, and we have engulfment anxiety. So what happens with the borderline, she seeks intimacy. She wants love. I say she, let it be clear, half of all borderlines are men. And half of all narcissists are women. But I'm using she because of historical reasons.
Yeah.
So the borderline would look for love, for intimacy, for immersion, for merger, for fusion, for symbiosis, a twin flame, a soulmate, a reflection, a copy, a clone. She would look for something like that. And then she would approach, and she would experience this reaction from the partner. And if the partner reciprocates, provides this intimacy, affords this love, the borderline panics. She panics. She feels suffocated. She feels shackled, imprisoned. She feels she's dying. And then she runs away. Avoidance. So we call it approach, avoidance, repetition, compulsion. Because it's compulsive. She cannot help it. So the borderline, on the one hand, has severe abandonment anxiety. She's terrified of rejection, of being ignored, of criticism, or exactly like the narcissist in this sense, but she has something the narcissist does not have, engulfment anxiety. And consequently, she cycles. And so this is the famous, I hate you, don't leave me. I hate you, don't leave me. Yeah.
Then I will ask you something. When the relation is very good and very nice, then one type of anxiety starts. When the relation is going bad, another type of anxiety
Yes, she's
starts.
always.
In anxiety.
Always. Anxiety is the background noise of borderline. The borderline is constantly anxious. She anticipates rejection, humiliation, abandonment, and she panics. And then she behaves in ways that cause the abandonment, because she becomes clinging, or she becomes aggressive, or she becomes demanding. But if this doesn't happen, if she has no reason to anticipate rejection and abandonment because the partner is in love, and you know, then she panics, because that means she's going to disappear. Borderline is about merger, about fusing with the partner, becoming one with the partner, like going back to the womb. It's symbiotic. It's creating a single organism with two heads. And this is a terrifying experience because it means that she has to disappear. The borderline hands over, outsources her mind to the intimate partner. She tells the intimate partner, from this moment on, you have perfect control over me. You can regulate my moods. You can make me happy. You can make me depressed. I'm giving you this power. You can regulate my emotions. A smile from you would change my emotions. If you criticize me, you can change my emotions. So you have total power over me. She hands over agency, total power. And that, of course, creates panic. Because if someone is in total control of you, total ownership of you, if someone is your master, that means you're the slave. Means you're a slave. And that is a terrifying thought, because what if the partner suddenly loses interest or abandons you? What if the partner is evil and is going to abuse this access and this power and torture the borderline? There are all kinds of scenarios. The borderline has enormous imagination. So there's all kinds of scenarios. And she panics and she runs away. She destroys, she undermines the relationship. She sabotages the relationship in a variety of ways. She could cheat. She could engage in infidelity. She could triangulate. Triangulation means you introduce a third party into the relationship and in order to provoke the intimate partner. She could literally undermine and sabotage the goals of the intimate partner. She could even place the intimate partner in at risk by, I don't know, going to the police or to the tax authorities and snitching on the partner. There's no end to what she can do in order to destroy the intimate relationship, because what threatens the borderline?
But that doesn't just give harm to the people, and it doesn't just give harm to the relation. Then she can give harm to the person also.
One way to get rid of
legally.
One way to get rid of the relationship is to get rid of a partner.
It's a border.
When you get rid of a partner, there's no relationship. It is the relationship that threatens the borderline. Another thing in borderline, which is less common in narcissism, is anger. Not necessarily rage, but anger. With narcissism, we have narcissistic rage. But narcissistic rage is reactive. If you disagree with the narcissist, criticize the narcissist, humiliate the narcissist, and so on and so forth, the reaction might be, not always, narcissistic rage. In borderline, the background is anger. Like anxiety, exactly like anxiety, the anger is always there, very close to the surface. It's very easy to provoke the borderline. And she is constantly angry. And this anger manifests in outbursts, but she can also be passive-aggressive, or she can be angry as a state of mind. She could be constantly angry. It's an angry person. You know. Anger is a crucial element in borderline. It's inappropriate, and it's uncontrolled, and it defines the borderline. And finally, another psychological feature of all borderlines. So everything I just described is common and valid for all borderlines.
Basic borderline.
All types, yes. These are the clinical features which are common to all borderlines. So, and the last one is emptiness. The borderline feels empty inside. She feels a void. She feels like she is a black hole. And she has to fulfill this emptiness somehow. So some of them fulfill the emptiness with theatrics and dramatics. Some of them fulfill the hope to fulfill the emptiness via the intimate partner. This kind of borderline might say, you are my world, you are my life, I'm living for you, you know. The borderline develops a multiplicity of techniques to cope with the emptiness and to fulfill it somehow. Because the alternative is to experience the emptiness, which leads usually to self-harm, self-mutilation, cutting, and so on, and suicidal ideation. Depending on the population of borderlines, between 3% and 11% of borderlines die of suicide. Oh. That's a huge number. It means that 1 of every 10 borderlines would end his or her life. And that is the leading cause of death among borderlines. Suicide. Not cancer, not heart attack, but suicide. Okay. So these are the core features of borderline. Now let's talk about other clinical features which are common, but you could be a borderline without them. These clinical features. You could be diagnosed with borderline and not have these features. You cannot be diagnosed with borderline unless you have the features that I mentioned until now. These are minimum requirements to be diagnosed. But now there's many others, and we'll talk about them. Again, I will compare all the time to narcissists. Yes.
Okay.
Number 1 is identity disturbance or identity diffusion. The borderline's identity is not stable. So on Monday, she has some values, she has some beliefs, she's committed to a certain course of action, she has plans for her life, she has attitudes, she has motivations. That's on Monday. On Wednesday, she will be the exact opposite than Monday. So on Monday, she could say, people who cheat on their spouses should be executed. I hate cheating. There's nothing worse than infidelity. Then on Wednesday, she will go to a bar, she will pick up a stranger, and she will cheat with him. So that's an example of what we call axiological shift in values. But also beliefs. She can say on Monday, I believe in God. Definitely God is managing my life. I find solace and comfort in God, and so on. And then on Wednesday, she will espouse the most extreme form of atheism, and so on. So there's no stability, not in values, not in beliefs, not in attitudes, not in motivations. Of course, her plans change all the time. On Monday, she wants to go to study agriculture. On Wednesday, she decided to be a mathematician. And on Friday, she would be a traditional wife and housewife. Of course, until next Monday, when she would want to become an astronaut. Yeah?
Are they aware of these shiftings?
Not really, because one major problem with borderline, and that is opposed to what people believe, is that borderlines are egosyntonic. In other words, borderlines feel comfortable with who they are.
Oh.
Now, that's very important distinction. A borderline might feel guilty or ashamed for what she had done. She might also feel distressed, disappointed, and angry because of the consequences of her actions, the outcomes. But when it comes to herself, she feels good with who she is. She's egosyntonic. She actually is grandiose. Borderlines are grandiose, exactly like narcissists. So she would regard herself as superior in some way. Super beautiful, drop dead gorgeous. She's gorgeous and you drop dead. All kinds of, she would aggrandize herself in her own mind, and so she is egosyntonic. And in her mind, these shifts in identity, these cataclysmic transitions, are fully justified. She would say, for example, yeah, I wanted to study agriculture on Monday, but then I did some search online and there's no future in this. So that's why now I want to be an astronaut. Because, I think astronauts will go to Mars with Elon Musk, and so I want, you know, this kind of thing. She would invent
They
some
can
stupid.
find excuses very easily.
Yeah, some story. Okay. So identity diffusion or identity disturbance is pretty common in borderlines, but not all, in all. Next is dissociation. More extreme borderlines where the personality organization is seriously disturbed, seriously, where actually the personality is not put together at all, is kaleidoscopic, broken, shattered, fragments. You know, this kind of borderline, the extreme end of the spectrum, would usually have dissociation. She would dissociate when she finds herself in a situation of stress or extreme anxiety. For example, when she anticipates rejection or humiliation or experiences abandonment. Or in these conditions, she falls apart. She goes through a process called decompensation. All the defenses crumble or are disabled, and she remains without a skin. It's like she doesn't have a skin. She's in direct touch with reality and has no defense, no firewall, nothing. At that point, she has essentially only one option. She acts out. She externalizes aggression in some way. There's a lot of aggression, anger that is boiling and building and so on. There's a lot of fear, anxiety. And so to somehow get rid of these emotions, she would act out. She would do something crazy. But because whatever she is about to do is socially unacceptable and she hates some of her actions, she would later feel bad, guilty, ashamed. She knows it. So she would do it and forget about it. But I mean forget. Not,
really forget.
She's not pretending. She simply is not there. So we have three types of dissociation in borderline. We have amnesia, simply forgetting what happened. So she could sleep with a stranger, you know, on a one-night stand, and she would not remember it. Even when she's confronted with evidence and so on, she would be shocked. She would not have no recollection of the event. Even when she's not drunk. She could derealize. Derealization is when she does something, but it feels like a movie. It feels unreal. And depersonalization is when she does something, but she feels that she is not there. So her body is there, and someone is penetrating her or doing something to the body. She has left her body. She is not there. So these are all forms of dissociation. And dissociation is common in more extreme cases. Similarly, in more extreme cases, we have a very dangerous process actually, which is paranoid ideation. More extreme borderlines become paranoid easily. And then when they become paranoid, and because borderline is a disorder of aggression, when they become paranoid, they become positively dangerous, absolutely dangerous. If the borderline identifies you as a threat, she may wish to take you out somehow, poison you, kill you, do something, you know, just to reduce the anxiety. So externalized aggression in extreme borderline is anxiolytic. It reduces anxiety. None of the things I described applies to narcissism. Narcissists don't have identity diffusion, at least not in the borderline way. They don't dissociate. Narcissists don't dissociate only under stress, like borderline. They dissociate all the time. Narcissists have paranoid ideation, but only when they collapse. The paranoia is a form of grandiosity. I'm important. People are conspiring against me. People have malevolent intentions because I'm very crucial, I'm very superior. People envy me, so they want to. So this is the narcissism type of paranoia. But in narcissism, paranoid ideation is pretty limited to the collapse, and is never aggressive. Paranoia would not lead the narcissist to act against anyone. You know? And so the differences are very important. Next is the fact that both narcissists and borderlines have a false self. This is something that people don't know. They think only narcissists have a false self. It's not true. The borderline also has a false self. And similarly, the borderline is grandiose, exactly like the narcissist. And similarly, she has a fantasy. exactly like the narcissist. So what's the difference? These are critical features in narcissism. And if the borderline has all of them, maybe it's true that borderlines are narcissists. The answer is no, because the content of the false self and the content of the fantasy and the content of the grandiosity are very, very different
Their fantasies
to
are
narcissism.
different.
Yes. Whereas in narcissism, the fantasy is about the narcissist, the grandiosity of the narcissist. The fantasy in narcissism is what we call self-enhancing. It's a fantasy that makes the narcissist bigger in some way, more intelligent, more. So a narcissist could have a fantasy that he's a genius. That would be a classical cerebral narcissist fantasy. Or a narcissist could have a fantasy that is sexually irresistible. That's also a typical narcissistic fantasy. But the fantasy is about self-enhancing, the cognitive distortion, the grandiose narrative, the grandiose self-concept of the narcissist, which is inflated and unrealistic and counterfactual. In borderline, the fantasy is about the partner, not about herself. The fantasy is not a reimagining of the borderline. It's not about the borderline. The typical fantasy of the borderline, I found him. I found the one. He is going to be my rock. Now, someone knows me like no one else. Someone can therefore, because he knows me and loves me, because of course it's all dramatic, the love is intense and amazing and never before, and so on. So now this person will be able to reach into my mind and regulate my emotions, stabilize my moods, and generally make me harmonious, in harmony, make me feel at peace with myself, inner peace, reduce my anxiety, take away my anxiety. I will not be anxious anymore. Wonderful. I found instant therapy in the intimate partner. So the borderline's fantasy is exteriorized. It's a fantasy about someone else.
Can they fall in love very easily? Like, for example, the narcissist can change their supply very easily. Can borderline do that too?
Yes. And
Then they can find their real love so much.
But both narcissists and borderlines don't love.
Yeah.
This is not love, of course.
It's their fantasy.
It's
but,
fantasy.
But as you said, she thinks that she found the one, then she can find too many ones.
Yes, she can. The difference between borderline and narcissist is the discard phase. Whereas the narcissist discards offhandedly, instantaneously, and without any visible emotion. Just discards, like so much trash. You're no longer useful, or you contradicted the shared fantasy, or you criticized the narcissist, or you deviated, diverged from the internal object that represents you in the narcissist's mind, and so on. So you're all bad, you're devalued, narcissist splits you, you're all bad, and as an all bad, corrupt object, the narcissist throws you to the garbage, the same way he would throw to the garbage a battery that is finished, or a smartphone that's no longer working. So the discard in narcissism is callous, is cruel, is cold, is calculated, objectifies the discarded person, and so on. Whereas the borderline does not do it this way. The borderline approaches and avoids, and she would do it many, many times before she gives up on the partner.
Oh.
She would approach the partner and run away and come back and try again, and she doesn't give up on the partner very easily. Once she has given up on the partner, she immediately finds an alternative, exactly like the narcissist.
First they find someone and jump to
Not
another
always.
one.
Not always.
They can give time.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But that's in healthy people also.
Narcissists seek revenge or borders seek revenge? Because there are, I think borders can...
Revenge is more common in borderline, because borderline is much more aggressive than the narcissist. Revenge is most common among borderlines and psychopaths. Less common in narcissism. And that's a form of aggression, simply.
And I want to ask you something, as you answered before, but in generally we think that narcissists are men, borders are women. But here you told that there are 50% in average. What are the differences between the men and women, border women and border men?
There are no psychological differences. There are no psychodynamic differences between narcissistic men and narcissistic women, borderline men and borderline women. They are identical as far as psychology, clinical psychology. However, society, culture, informs women and men how to behave. This is called gender roles. There are gender roles. There are expectations, social expectations. There's a process of socialization. There are all kinds of social cues. There are all kinds of social sanctions if you misbehave. If you're a woman and you behave as a man, you would be punished. If you're a man and behave as a woman, you would be punished. So there are great incentives to conform to gender roles. Now, of course, gender roles change all the time, no question about it, but it's not true that gender roles have been eliminated. That's complete nonsense. They've just been transformed massively. The pathology would express itself via the gender role. So the pathology conforms to the gender role. A woman in a traditionalist society, conservative society, patriarchal society, her narcissism would express itself through her children. She would brag about the children. She would boast with the children. The children would be the sources of supply in such a society. Or she may be a perfect housewife or a perfect mother or a perfect wife, and she would be ostentatious about it. She would brag about it. She would inform everyone that she's perfect and so on. That's an example of manifestation of narcissism in traditionalist society with women. A man in this society may be, for example, ambitious and competitive, or maybe his locus of grandiosity, his grandiosity would be that he is a good person, that he is charitable, that he is helpful, that is a good member of the community or the collective. We call this prosocial narcissism. So society and culture dictate how the narcissism and the borderline would be manifested in women and men. And this is the main constraint. But as far as the psychology, it's identical. There are no differences.
Then both narcissists and borders can control their behaviors when there are consequences. Then they know how to control their behaviors.
No, borderlines cannot actually. But narcissists can. Borderlines cannot control their behaviors. They are what we call impulsive. The impulsivity in borderline is so big that the borderline is unable to take into account the consequences of her actions and so on and so forth, and she just acts. She is impulsive, as we call it, and that's why borderlines are considered to be reckless. In other words, they act in ways which endanger themselves as well as others. So they would engage in unsafe sex, or they would drink too much. Substance abuse is very common in borderline, because there is an element of recklessness, an element of a kind of variant of self-harm and self-destructiveness. So borderlines cannot, but narcissists definitely can and do adjust or control their behaviors according to the setting. So we know, for example, that narcissists in total institutions. Total institution is a place where you have to spend all the day and all the night. You cannot leave the place. So total institution is a prison or hospital or the army, these kind of places. So we know that in total institutions, narcissists, people diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, lose all the narcissistic behaviors. They don't show a single narcissistic behavior. Because in prison, if you behave in a narcissistic way, if you're contemptuous, if you're entitled, if you're disempathic, if you are aggressive, you're dead. Simply dead. Suddenly the narcissist is the nicest person.
Then they know what they do. Then they know what they do.
It's clear that narcissists can control and modify their behaviors at will. They definitely can, and they just don't care to do that. They don't care enough to do that. However, we should not confuse behaviors with internal dynamics. the dynamics of narcissism, for example, the motivation, why to do something, all these are intact. They're untouched. They cannot be cured or healed or changed, or they're fixed for life. They're lifelong. These are not affected by the environment. These. But the behaviors, definitely. We also know that in therapy, we have great success at modifying in all kinds of therapy. In schema therapy, to some extent CBT, Gestalt. We know that in many treatment modalities, we are pretty successful at convincing the narcissist to eliminate or to reduce or to modify abrasive behaviors, antisocial behaviors, unpleasant behaviors, socially unacceptable behaviors. We do it very frequently, very often. For example, if the narcissist is afraid to lose his family or all his money or his reputation or his position, the overwhelming majority of narcissists would modify their behaviors. Even behaviors that lasted for decades, even behaviors that became the hallmark or the badge of the narcissist, that he is known for these behaviors. But he would flip on a coin and the behaviors would be gone. So, yes, there is control in narcissism.
Which disorder is easier to diagnose?
Borderline is a lot easier to diagnose. A lot easier, but both disorders, within a few sessions, 3 to 5 sessions with the patient, both disorders can be diagnosed safely. So it's not like it's something that would take years or decades to diagnose it. It's pretty. These are pretty visible disorders. It's. I mentioned many elements that are common to borderline and not common in narcissism. In narcissism also we don't have suicidal ideation. Narcissist is not suicidal. Narcissists do not self-harm. They do not mutilate or cut themselves or whatever. However, when a narcissist goes through extreme stress, collapse, narcissistic mortification, the narcissist suddenly begins to resemble a lot a borderline patient.
Mood disorders.
Borderline. He begins to resemble a lot the borderline patient. So he loses the defenses. And when he loses the narcissistic defenses, what remains under it is the borderline. So there is an affinity between borderline and narcissism. And one could say that narcissism is a kind of repressed borderline, suppressed borderline. Narcissism could be described as a series of techniques and strategies to mitigate or to eliminate borderline personality organization, exactly like Kernberg suggested. But on presentation, in a clinical setting, definitely narcissism and borderline are not the same. They should and can be distinguished. Let me have a look if there's something I missed. Yes, one thing maybe. That is psychosis. Psychosis and other self-states. When the narcissist and the borderline are exposed to pressures and stresses that they cannot manage, which increase the anxiety and make the anxiety overwhelming and so on, both of them sometimes develop psychosis. The psychosis is very brief, could last a few minutes, a few hours, maximum 3 or 4 days, and this is known as psychotic micro-episodes. So they have this psychotic reaction to stress. But before they reach this final stage of psychosis, they go through transformations. The narcissist becomes borderline when under stress, and the borderline becomes secondary psychopath. So when you pressure a borderline, threaten her, abandon her, humiliate her, reject her, she is likely to become highly psychopathic.
She won't feel remorse, or
she would become psychopathic in the sense that she would be defiant, she would be aggressive, she would be reckless, She would be contumacious. She would reject authority and so on. But I didn't say primary psychopath. A primary psychopath does not experience regret or remorse. A secondary psychopath does. So a secondary psychopath is a psychopath who has emotions and empathy. So the borderline becomes a psychopath behaviorally, but emotionally she still retains the capacity for emotions and the capacity for empathy. So
borderline has empathy?
Borderline, we used to think that borderline has empathy like healthy people, or even more. But today we know that borderline has empathy, but it's very reduced. We did discover, however, pretty recently, that borderline has cold empathy, exactly like narcissist and psychopath. A borderline is able to scan you, immediately discover your weaknesses, vulnerabilities, fears, and so on, vectors of attack. And she would use this, but she would use this information not like the psychopath. The psychopath would use this information to get your money or to have sex with you. The narcissist would use this information to convert you into a source of narcissistic supply or participant in the shared fantasy. The borderline would use this information to make you into her intimate partner or special person. So that she can obtain the succor and the support and the love and the intimacy and so on that she's looking for.
Manipulation, evet.
All these interactions involve manipulation. The most extreme form of manipulation is codependency. In codependency, the codependence message is, I can't manage without you. I can't live without you. I can't accomplish things without you. I need you. Neediness is the core of codependency, clinging. And that is, of course, highly manipulative. It's what we call control from the bottom. The codependent controls you by being submissive. There's no form of control more extreme and pernicious and insidious than submissiveness. When you're submissive, you're totally in control. When you have a family member who is constantly sick, and you would feel obligated to be there, to help, and you would never leave this person, because if you leave her, she would die. So it's control, it's manipulation. Submissiveness is a form of control. Anyone who engages in BDSM, BDSM is a kind of sex, sadomasochistic sex. Anyone would tell you that the person who is really in control in the BDSM sex is the submissive, not the dominant. The submissive person is in control. The dom or dominant person is just doing what the submissive wants. Submissiveness is a major form of control. Codependents use it. Some borderlines use it. Some borderlines play the submissive. It's very difficult for borderline to play the submissive because she's grandiose.
Because she wants to be the boss, but
she's grandiose. She thinks she's superior. She thinks she's... So it's difficult for her. A borderline who is submissive is faking, acting. So that's the difference between borderlines and...
It's a form of manipulation also.
Yes, but intentional. Whereas in codependency, the codependent is submissive and it's not intentional. It's who she is. It's her nature. But in borderline, it's not her nature. She is faking it. Because the real core of borderline is as grandiose as a narcissist. Borderline is as grandiose as narcissist. Exactly. Maybe sometimes more. So that's why borderlines and narcissists often come together. Because the affinity, the closeness, there's a huge psychological closeness between narcissists and they resemble each other very much. And they give each other a perfect solution.
Yeah, their needs are
compatible. The borderline is looking for a strong, self-confident person who would regulate her, control her. That's the narcissist's wet dream, to control someone, So narcissist loves it. He's in control, he's in charge, he's the master, he's this. And she feeds the narcissist. She tells you, you're amazing, you're incredible, you're this, you're irresistible, you're genius. And the narcissist experiences narcissistic elation. She becomes a drug. The borderline becomes the drug of the narcissist and fulfills all his needs. So she weaves, she creates the exact shared fantasy that the narcissist wants. The narcissist, on the other hand, also caters to the needs of the borderline. It's also very good for the borderline, because narcissists are good at regulating other people externally. Narcissism, pathological narcissism, is about regulating other people from the outside. If the narcissist wants you as a source of narcissistic supply, he would manipulate you psychologically, he would regulate you psychologically, externally, from the outside, so that you give him supply. So they are the masters of fantasy, narcissists are the masters of fantasy, and the masters of external regulation, which is exactly what the borderline has been looking for all her life. You know. That also explains current political realities, because people all over the world, can't survive in reality anymore. Reality is too much for them.
Yes.
Everyone is looking now, everyone. There's no country, to best of my knowledge, that is an exception. Everyone now is looking for a fantasy. And who is the world's leading authority on fantasy? The narcissist.
Yeah,
so if you're looking for fantasy, naturally you would have narcissistic leaders, and narcissistic intellectuals, and narcissistic scientists, and narcissistic everything. Because they can give you the perfect fantasy. They've been doing it since age 3. You know, they're building fantasy. They're the experts. And so, and of course, because everyone, and now I'm talking about collectives, huge collectives, nation states, and I'm talking about the totality of humanity, because all humanity now is looking for fantasies.
Yes.
Narcissists rise to the top and they give the fantasy, but then that means that the other side becomes borderline.
Then the society becomes borderline.
Because society becomes more and more borderline, because this is the natural combination. Narcissist, borderline.
That's why societies are so angry now.
Angry, labile, up and down the mood, aggressive.
Aggressive, yes.
These are all
Wild.
borderline features. Suicidal. People are drinking much more, doing drugs much more, committing suicide much more.
That's right.
And so on. Suicide went up 4 times, 5 times in certain age groups. So we're becoming more borderline all the time. And we're becoming more borderline because the organizing principle nowadays is fantasy. And in charge of fantasy are the fantasy makers, the geniuses of fantasy, narcissists. Again, not only in politics, in science. I see fantasy definitely in science. I've been a scientist all my life, since age 9. I see fantasy in science now, in physics, in biology, in neuroscience, of course. Neuroscience is 90% fantasy. Physics now is 70-80% fantasy. Nothing to do anymore with reality. Nothing. In physics today you have theories that are completely divorced from reality, like string theory. You know, similarly in neuroscience, they live in fantasy. They find one neuron or one gene, and immediately they declare that they decoded the human mind. This is fantasy. When you make grandiose claims, exaggerated claims, it's the major clinical sign for fantasy. Major. When you go to a neuroscientist and the neuroscientist tells you, or geneticist, and the geneticist tells you, I found the gene for gambling. That minute you know, this guy lives in fantasy. That minute you know it. Because gambling is a super complex behavior with multiple layers and so on. Yes, of course gambling would be connected to the genes. The genes are the hardware. But probably to hundreds of genes or thousands of genes working together. Anyone who makes a claim that they found the gene for gambling, and I'm kidding you not, such a claim was made, this is a person who lives in fantasy. And today, 90% of the claims are like that. 90%. And there are other fantasies, like if you were traumatized, you can pass it through the genes to next generation. That's complete fantasy. Today, everything is fantasy, in science, in politics, in cinema.
Why human needs fantasy?
Sorry?
Why human beings need fantasy?
Because the alternative sucks. Reality is unbearable, intolerable, unacceptable, frustrating, crushing. Crushing.
And and in the society, when we see bad people, we think that they are all disordered. Can a person be ill and he or she can't have disorder also?
The vast majority of, I don't know what is evil, but the vast majority of abusers, for example, don't have any mental health disorder. It's about control, about
They
power.
call all bad people that he can be narcissistic or psychopath or border.
No.
Some,
A small minority are. The vast majority of people who are antisocial, or people who are self-interested, egotistical, people who are abusers, and so on and so forth. There's nothing, no mental health condition of any kind, not only personality disorder.
pure evil. Just.
Someone may be emotionally invested in control and power. So this kind of person would abuse people. In domestic violence, for example, there have been many studies about domestic violence, Bancroft and many others, and consistently we found that domestic abusers, people who beat up women and children, they don't have any mental illness.
Just anger issues.
Anger issues, control. Control was the main thing. Power. It's a power play. Same with rape. Majority of rapists are mentally healthy, completely mentally healthy. It's just about power. It's a power play, you know. And the more society is organized around the concept of power, the more it legitimizes abusive behavior. You know. So now you have abusive political leaders, abusive, media figures. You have abusive influences, like maybe Andrew Tate. You have this kind of people where abuse is, and now you have abuse openly in the United States as a principle of government. So again, there are massive social and cultural influences, and they are much more important than mental illness.
Yes,
among
I think so.
among bad people, as you call them, or power-hungry people, controlling people, and so on and so forth. Culture and society are much more important components than. And of course, we have a perfect experiment that is Nazi Germany, where in Nazi Germany, 3 million people out of a population of about 55 million adults, 3 million people joined the SS, which was an evil organization. If ever was an evil organization, it's the SS. 3 million people joined. You can't say that all of them were mentally ill.
Yeah.
And there has been a study by Goldhagen of the psychological profile of the people who executed the Jews in concentration camps, in the gas chambers, and executed them with a gun. So he studied their psychology, and he discovered that almost all of them
Normal.
totally normal. They were accountants and lawyers, and they had families, and they had dogs, and they played music, and they were all totally normal.
They
couldn't
they
find
can
actually-
just crave power because of this. They maybe attend or
No,
volunteer.
in their case, it was the influence of the culture and society. They didn't crave power. They were normal people.
It's sadistic.
No, they were not sadistic. They were told by culture and society that this is the right thing to do. So they did. They were told the Jews are enemies, the Jews are dangerous, and there's a threat to Germany, and you should kill them. So they killed them.
It's so easy to control people or manipulate.
Yes, it's easy to control people because people have many, many needs that are unmet, repressed, ignored. If you have the right equipment, you can detect what people need.
Yeah.
And then you can tell them that you're going to give them what they need. You don't have to give them. You just have to tell them that you will give them. And that moment you create an addiction. And you're in full control from that moment. It has nothing to do with mental illness. Of course, you have, mentally ill people like narcissists, psychopaths, sadists. You have. And
What
they
is
are
the
also
percentage
bad people.
in a society, for
Sorry?
example, personally disordered people, percentage in the society?
No.
But you cannot
less,
diagnose
a lot
because
less.
they don't come to therapy generally.
No one comes to therapy.
Yes,
It's a common. No one comes to therapy. Not only narcissists. Borderlines don't come to
Yes.
therapy. Psychotic people don't come to
Then
therapy.
how can you know the percentage?
Okay, so we have statistical tools that allow us to learn from those who do come to therapy, allow us to extrapolate. How do you know who is going to be elected? You make anketa, you make opinion poll with 1,500 people. And from 1,500 people, you learn about 40 million people. Same in psychology.
Then what is the percentage?
We have a small group that do come to therapy, and from this small group, we learn about a bigger group. That's why statistics is a crucial tool in psychology. So the claim online that narcissists don't come to therapy, so we don't know how many narcissists there are. It's nonsense. These are people who have no idea about psychology or science, you know, like majority of people online. So we do know exactly how many narcissists there are. We do know exactly how many borderlines, exactly how many psychotic. We know about every mental diagnosis, how many people there are. So narcissists in society, it's probably around 2%. People diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. However, there are many more people who have a narcissistic style. Narcissistic style is subclinical narcissism, narcissism that cannot be diagnosed as a disorder. So these are people who are obnoxious, they lack empathy, they're exploitative, they're envious, but they don't. This doesn't amount to a disorder. They don't reach that level of disorder. They don't have, for example, extreme problems with telling the difference between internal and external. They don't have fantasy. People with narcissistic style don't have a fantasy. Fantasy defense is unique to NPD, to the disorder, not to the style. They don't have a false self. Narcissists do. So the ones with the disorder, we are talking between, depending on the period, depending on the country and so on, between 1.7% and possibly up to 3%, depending on the country. The average, the global average is probably around 2%.
2%.
Only, yes. And when you see self-styled experts online saying that 1 of every 6 people is a narcissist, whoever said that has no idea what he or she is talking about. It's an ignorant person.
Then in the society, narcissistic traits rise, not the shared fantasy or the false self, but the traits rise.
There is a rise in narcissistic traits that's been documented by Twenge and Campbell and others. That much is true. I also think there's a rise in narcissistic style, because narcissistic style is perceived nowadays to be positive and leads to positive outcomes. So it's self-efficacious. It's a positive adaptation. In July 2016, the magazine New Scientist, which is a very important scientific magazine, had a cover story: parents, teach your children to be narcissists. So narcissism is becoming, and even in some academic settings, some faculties, including in Cambridge, United Kingdom, where I work, even in these settings, you have people saying that narcissism is a positive thing, the next step in evolution. It's very important. Narcissists are good leaders of the military, the corporate companies, economic companies. Narcissists are good political leaders and so on. So there is a glorification and glamorization and legitimization of narcissism nowadays, and starting with psychopathy now. Now you have a few academics, Kevin Dutton and others, that say that psychopathy is a great thing, and we would not have survived without psychopath. And we should put them in charge. We should make them the leaders, because they're much better at making decisions.
And that professors can be psychopath also?
Well, I don't know him personally. But you have an incentive as an academic to say these things, because the people in charge, the people who give you the money, they're all narcissists and psychopaths. So of course, if you say such things, you will benefit. You understand? Even in social activism, in social justice movements, as I mentioned yesterday, narcissists and psychopaths took over these movements. So this is established in studies.
So let's talk about the narcissistic disorder types, so we can see who is who and we can understand better. How many types
for
we have?
generations, there have been attempts to classify narcissists. So initially there was the phallic narcissist. Don't ask. many classifications. What is accepted today is that there are at least 2 types of narcissists. One is known as the overt narcissist, and one is known as the covert narcissist. Both of them are grandiose. Again, people online, so-called experts online, make the mistake. They say that the overt is grandiose. Both of them are grandiose. The only difference is that the covert fails to obtain supply. Is in a constant state of collapse. Whereas the overt is good at obtaining supply. That's basically the difference between them. The covert narcissist is passive-aggressive. The main affect, the main emotion of the covert narcissist is envy. Envy defines the covert narcissist. The covert narcissist is a bit more Machiavellian, manipulative, and so on. The overt narcissist is more open, more clear, and so this is the first very critical distinction. The covert narcissist is vulnerable, is shy usually, fragile. The internal structure is very fragile, easy to challenge the covert narcissist, and easy to push the covert narcissist to mortification and narcissistic injury. The covert narcissist is regards himself as a victim of discrimination, or victim of his peers who are envious of him, or victims of society and institutions. So there is a lot more paranoid ideation in covert narcissism, and persecutory delusions and persecutory objects. The covert narcissist is less likely to function well in workplace settings, in society, and so on, so is more likely to be homebound. And in this sense, covert narcissists are more schizoid than overt narcissists. This is today the major distinction made, and that is the only one acceptable to all scholars. Other distinctions, which I will discuss in a minute, not yet accepted by everyone. But this distinction is accepted by everyone. There's only one problem with it. And the problem is that all narcissists are sometimes overt and sometimes covert.
They can shift.
So, yes, so it's not true to say that you are either that or that. It seems that these are states of all narcissists. All narcissists can be this or this. When the overt narcissist fails to obtain narcissistic supply on a regular basis and therefore collapses, he becomes covert. He becomes very vulnerable, very fragile, very hypervigilant, depressed, dysphoric, and then he withdraws. He becomes schizoid. The overt narcissist withdraws from society because it's painful. He cannot obtain supply. So he withdraws, and he begins to hate people. He's resentful, he's envious, and he begins to sabotage people and institutions, becomes passive aggressive. And at that minute, that's a covert narcissist.
And he self-supplies.
He self-supplies as an interim stage between overt and covert. But when everything fails, he becomes covert. So overt becomes covert. The covert takes time, recovers, finds new victims, new sources of supply, moves to another location, establishes a new pathological space, and after 7 years, 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, 2 days, he becomes overt. Overt, covert, covert, overt. All narcissists have these phases. We today begin to believe that what happens is the overts and are less likely to be in clinical settings. They're less likely to go to therapy or less likely to be studied by clinical psychologists and so on than the coverts. So we are getting a distorted picture. In clinical practice, the coverts would be overrepresented. In academia, the overts would be overrepresented. So that's why we think that there are two types, but there are not two types. When the overt collapses, there is, for example, suicidal ideation. There is emotional dysregulation, emotional lability. The overt panics. And then it is then that the overt goes to therapy. The overt goes to therapy when they hit rock bottom, when there's nothing left. They lost everything. They lost spouses, they lost children, they lost their money, they were in prison, they are disaster, catastrophe. Then the overt would go to therapy.
Just for depression.
But at that point though, the overt is no longer overt. He is covert. So the therapist would see a covert. While this person only a year ago was totally overt, would never dream to go to therapy. You know? And the academics, they study that person. They study the overt. They never see the covert. Because the covert
never goes to therapy.
So they would disagree. The clinicians and the academics would disagree. And that would create the impression of two types, which is not true. Another distinction is one that I invented or came up with between somatic and cerebral narcissists. The somatic narcissist obtains supply by using his body. And as I using his body, it doesn't have to be sex. Could be bodybuilding, could be muscles, could be... But he's using his body, this kind of narcissist. He's using his body to obtain supply. The cerebral narcissist uses his brain, his intellect, his intelligence, intellectual pyrotechnics. The somatic narcissist would be very keen on sexual conquest. He would constantly count how many people he had sex with, or he would measure himself all the time. He would be very involved in his health. He would be either a hypochondriac, or he would have fitness devices measuring all the time how much he's walking. And so there's preoccupation with the body as a source of supply. The supply doesn't have to be external. It could be self-supply. For example, losing 20 kilos. So he loses 20 kilos and he feels superior. He feels that he had a huge accomplishment. And so this aggrandizes the somatic narcissist. The cerebral narcissist also can self-supply. He could create a YouTube video and he can tell himself, you see what a genius I am? This is genius YouTube video. Yeah.
It's a safe supply, I think.
Yeah, safe supply. Stable at least. So this is somatic versus cerebral. Another distinction that is sometimes made, but I think is very important, is the prosocial versus antisocial. Prosocial or communal narcissist is a narcissist whose grandiosity, whose locus of grandiosity, whose grandiose fantasy about himself, whose inflated self-concept is, I'm a good person. I'm a good person, I'm charitable, I'm altruistic, I'm loving, I contribute to the community and to my country, I am moral. I am more moral than other people. I never lie. I'm this, I'm that. So this kind of narcissist would emphasize pro-social things that society likes and society encourages. And generally speaking, his self-concept or self-image would be a superiorly good person. Not only good, but unusually good person. Unprecedentedly good person, amazingly good person, maybe even a saint, or maybe even connected to God somehow, on a mission to help people. Gurus.
Then that kind of people collect their supply from giving money to charity.
Yes,
or
charitable, as I said. Yes, they could be charitable, but whatever they do, they advertise it. They make sure that everyone knows. Because this is the supply. So this type of people could become gurus, medical doctors, psychiatrists or therapists. They could become
mothers also.
NGO workers.
Like
Sorry?
And some mothers are like this.
Some mothers like that, activists. But always the self-concept or self-image as an unusually good person. Not good person, good to everyone, unusually good. Like my morality, I never met anyone more honest than me. You know, you can trust me like you trust no one else. That's the message of the prosocial.
That kind of person can lie?
Yes. But if that person lies, he would say, I'm lying for good cause. I'm lying to help people.
Narcissists have double life. They say they have double life.
No, not all of them. No.
There is a false self that they show and they believe, but there is a life that no one can see behind the closed doors.
No, that's completely untrue. No.
They are just shifting in the mind then.
There's no narcissist, there's only the false self. The narcissist is the false self at home, outside, and so on and so forth. Narcissists, of course, can obtain narcissistic supply differently from different groups, would adapt his behavior. So with some group he would be nice and kind and so on, because that's the way to obtain supply. With the other group he would be abusive and threatening and so on, because that's the way to obtain supply. He would be nice to his family maybe and not nice to his workers, or vice versa. Nice to his workers and not nice to his family. But it will always be about obtaining narcissistic supply, and usually there is a unifying narrative, a unifying principle. The false self has a story, and the story is the narcissist. If the story of the narcissist is, I'm a good person, that would be the story everywhere at all times and so on. And if this kind of narcissist behaves in a bad way, lies or cheats or beats up his wife or is aggressive, or he will invent a story that will explain why he's doing it in a good way. So I am lying because it's good for people. Or I am beating you up because I want to educate you. It's good for you. Tough love. Yeah? I'm verbally abusing you because you're naive and I'm protecting you. You know, this kind of thing.
They can find excuses.
They can always find a way to, but it will always be what we call ego congruent. In other words, it will always support the false self. It will never be ego alien. It will never contradict the false self. So if my false self is I'm a good person, the stories that I will invent as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, they will all support the view that I'm a good person. If my narrative is that I'm a genius, whatever I do will support the view that I'm a genius. Even if I behave in a very stupid way and so on, I will say, they think it's stupid, but I know that it is a genius what I'm doing. You know, always there will be the support of the central narrative in narcissism. And so you have prosocial narcissists. You have, on the other hand, this distinction is the antisocial narcissist, which is by far the most dangerous type of narcissist. But I mean by far, is far more dangerous than psychopath, far more dangerous than narcissist. It's this malignant narcissist. This is known as malignant narcissist or psychopathic narcissist, antisocial narcissist, is probably the most dangerous person alive. I am not aware of any other disorder which is more dangerous than this. Not sadism, not psychosis, no. This is the most dangerous. Why? Is it combines all the extremely bad elements of narcissism with all the tools of the psychopath. So while the malignant narcissist is actually a narcissist, he has a false self, he has a fantasy, and so on and so forth, he will not use typical narcissistic tools and techniques, which are the tools and techniques of a child. The typical narcissist is a child, is a baby, he's 2 years old, 3 years old. So, you know, it's funny sometimes. You look at the narcissist, you smile. It's like a baby who's doing cute things. So a typical narcissist would manipulate you and abuse you and everything, but he would do it more like a child. And you would see it coming, and sometimes you will forgive. Easier to forgive, but not the malignant narcissist. The malignant narcissist is a narcissist, full-fledged, extreme form of narcissist, but he does not use almost any narcissistic technique and tool. He is not a child. He uses psychopathic tools, extreme psychopathic tools. He is cruel, he is callous, he is ruthless, he is aggressive, violently, dangerously aggressive. He hates authority, his contumacious, he is defiant, he is reckless. He couldn't care less about people. He objectifies them, uses them, tramples on them, kills them if necessary. You know. Has no remorse, no regret, no shame, no guilt, no afterthought.
And to everyone, I think.
Not everyone, yes.
To everyone.
Everyone. And this is the kind of person who can easily kill, millions of people, or has no problem whatsoever. Erich Fromm, the famous psychoanalyst, in the 60s, diagnosed Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin and Mao with malignant narcissism, if you want examples of malignant narcissist. So this is by far the most extreme form. It was described in depth for the first time by Fromm, but the clinical features and everything were described by Otto Kernberg in I think 1975, I'm not sure, in the 70s and 80s. So now we have this malignant narcissist picture. And luckily for humanity, only a very small percentage of narcissists are malignant narcissists. Malignant narcissism is not a comorbidity of narcissism and psychopathy. Not. This is a common mistake online, again. In a comorbidity of narcissism and psychopathy, in other words, when the same individual is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and psychopathy, so there are two diagnoses for the same person, the narcissism is in charge. Narcissism is boss.
Because of the shared
Everything.
fantasy.
Shared fantasy, false self, all the dynamics, everything. So
the
it's
psychopath
actually,
doesn't have a shared
it's actually a
fantasy.
narcissist. The psychopath in comorbidity, psychopath comes out when the narcissist is stressed, anxious, humiliated, narcissistic mortification, collapsed. Only in these extreme situations, the psychopathic side of the comorbidity manifests. But that's rare. Someone with narcissism and psychopathy together as a comorbidity, 90% of the time would be narcissist. Classic, regular narcissist. It's not the case with malignant narcissists. Malignant narcissist is not a comorbidity. It's a combination of all the clinical features of narcissists, all the clinical features of psychopath, and all the clinical features of sadists. Malignant narcissist is three.
And paranoia, I think.
Paranoia is outcome in all cluster B. But these three, sadist, psychopath, and narcissist, together, all the time, manifesting all the time. Not that one of them is in reserve, one of them is only for emergency, one of them is for collapse. No. This kind of narcissist is all the time narcissist, all the time psychopath, and all the time sadist. Whatever he does, with his wife, with his children, with his colleagues, he would always be at the same moment narcissist, psychopath, and sadist. So it's not a comorbidity. It's a amalgam. It's a concoction, cocktail that is really terrifying. And luckily, we think that only about 2 to 3% of narcissists are like that. And they create the biggest damage in interpersonal relationships, but also in politics, also in, as you heard, Hitler, Stalin.
For example, Hitler's shared fantasy, to save his nation, he must kill millions of people.
Example.
Like
Yes.
this.
Yes. So this kind of person is always a sadist, always. So he would kill these people in sadistic way, and he would.
Without remorse.
But
or-
as a psychopath, he would kill them. As a sadist, he would torture them. As a narcissist, all this will be motivated by a shared fantasy.
shared fantasy.
So everything is operating all the time, all the time. If he has a family, he would create a shared fantasy for the family, but then he would physically abuse his wife, verbally and psychologically abuse his child, sexually abuse his daughter, and then torture all of them all the time. This is the family of malignant narcissists.
Can a malignant narcissist can have a collapse also?
That's more rare in malignant narcissism.
They are more-
Yes, it can. Of course it can, but it's much more rare in malignant narcissism. Malignant narcissism is a defense against a defense against a defense. It's like
They are not fragile, I think.
they're not fragile, exactly. The core is borderline, actually. Then there is narcissistic defense, and then the narcissist, to protect against the collapse, you have psychopathy. To protect against the psychopathy, you have sadism. So it's like layers and firewalls and layers and firewalls. We could say, if you want to look at it that way, that it's the perfect adaptation, perfect evolutionary adaptation, the killing machine, which is untouchable, impermeable, unchangeable, inexorable. It's a killing machine, simply. And of course, you find malignant narcissists among serial killers, among tyrants who kill millions. Among, these are malignant narcissists. When you go to, for example, when you study the chief executive officers of Forbes 500 companies, so there was a study by Robert Hare and Nathan Babiak. They are the two greatest authorities on psychopathy. And they found that among chief executive officers, there are 5 times more psychopaths than in the general population. Other studies found that you have much higher prevalence of psychopaths among surgeons, surgeons, yes, and the military and so on. So, similar studies found that there is an overrepresentation of narcissists in show business and media, the media.
Being a psychopath doesn't mean that you are going to harm everyone.
No, of course not. So that's what I'm saying. That you could have a psychopath, you could have a narcissist, and it would be fully functional and integrated in society and even prosocial and so on. But you cannot have a prosocial malignant narcissist. You cannot. You cannot have a malignant narcissist who would build things. He would build in order to destroy. And he would destroy in order to harm people, in order to cause them pain.
He is aware of
He
that.
thrives on pain. The real narcissistic supply of a malignant narcissist is the pain of other people. He is like a vampire of pain. Whereas a narcissist would take away your energy, and a psychopath would take away your money, a malignant narcissist would take away your pain. And he thrives on it. It elevates him. You know, in Slavic mythology, you have mythological characters like Kości and Veles and so on. And these demonic entities, they thrive on pain. They cause pain to people and it makes them come alive and so on. That's in Slavic, classic pan-Slavic mythology. And so the malignant narcissist is this. And when people say narcissists are demons and I don't know what,
That one is a demon. I
yes,
think.
if anyone comes close to this kind of description, it would be the malignant narcissist. Yeah.
Okay. Then in the next podcast, we are going to talk about the no contact. And for the abusers, we are going to talk about the healing. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.